Coral Kelp and Community, Episode 9, The Natural Disaster with Jillian Guernsey. This is our first deep dive episode, and it seemed good timing as the holidays are approaching and everyone is running into the kitchen trying to make the best decisions for their family and for the planet. What we eat is a very personal choice, but are food labels helping us or hindering us? And do they actually tell us anything about farm runoff that impacts the ocean or any other environmental concerns? Okay, so let's talk about your paper.
Okay. Sounds good.
I really enjoyed reading your paper. The
Thank
first thing
you.
I'm going to do is compliment your writing style.
Oh, thank you.
It was really easy to read. For almost 30 pages, I felt like it was a page turner. It just flew by.
Well, good. Thank you. I'm
Um,
glad.
yeah, which, usually you would think a law review article would not be a page turner. Um, but it was great. It was fascinating,
Yeah.
and some of the things you wrote blew my mind.
What was the
Um,
most shocking to you?
the most shocking to me was the information about vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
Which we'll get to.
We'll get to
That's
that.
one of
We'll
the
get there.
examples from your paper I want to discuss.
Little tease for you. Yeah.
Little teaser, yeah, coming up, vanilla.
Yes.
Um, but so this paper very broadly discusses the effect of food labeling and organic labeling,
Mm-hmm.
what these terms mean, if they're actually useful anymore. And yes, listeners, I will tie this into the ocean. Um, but let's just to orientate
Yes.
everybody. Um, let's start out with you discussed a thing called the natural fallacy
Naturalistic
and
fallacy, but
the
yes.
naturalistic fallacy. Thank you.
Yes. So the
And
yes. So
and our intuition about food.
yes. So yes, the naturalistic fallacy is a phenomenon that exists in areas other than food. It exists just across the board. Um, it's a psychological sort of thing with humans. Is we assign a higher moral value or ethical value or worth to things that are quote natural versus things that are unnatural. So in our minds, in our sort of collective consciousness, natural things are better than things that are not natural. I mean, think about even, you die of natural causes. That means you live to your 90 and you die in your sleep. Whereas if you die an unnatural death, that means you were poisoned or shot or something terrible. So again, it's a very I mean, I hate to use this word. Every time this word comes up just in conversation now, I always hate it, but it's a very natural phenomenon. It is something that's very deeply ingrained in the human psyche.
Mhm.
Um, so that I think it exists in terms of food specifically. You see it all over. You get a package of chips and it says, "Oh, all natural flavors or made with natural flavors," or what have you. And people flock to those kinds of foods because, oh, it's all natural. That must mean it's healthy. When in reality, because of the complexities of the current food market, that term has become more of a marketing term than anything else. It's not very meaningful in today's current food market.
Yeah, it was funny. Immediately after I read your paper, I had to go to the grocery store. You know, we do
you
eat
don't
3 times a
you look
day.
at food labels differently after
And well, I actually I took a picture of this and I have to send it to you. But
Okay.
there was this cheese spread in a tube
Mm.
labeled all natural. And it had this little cartoon chef on it, and it looked like the most unnatural form of cheese. And I was
Yeah,
like, "Really?"
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's in a tube, guys.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I know.
you squeeze it out of a tube, like, it's almost like it reminded me of Cheese Whiz in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm
Yeah.
put a natural label on Cheese Whiz, and I'm like, "Mm."
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I even mentioned this in the paper. The fact that there is such a thing as all natural Cheetos is
Yeah.
just kind of a little like speaks to how meaningless that term has become.
Yeah, and so, uh, tell me about our intuition with food, because there's the obvious stuff that you're like, "Oh, that's
Yeah,
natural. It's an apple."
absolutely, and that is so like there are times when our intuition about a natural food also being healthy happens to be true, and that's true with fresh produce certainly. Like you see an apple in the store, it's natural. It also happens to be healthy. But that's just not the case with a lot of other products. Even though, you buy. I think the example I gave in the paper was apple juice. Like in contrast to whole apples,
Mhm.
was that you see all natural apple juice. Okay, it's made of apples theoretically, but it's also just it's loaded with sugar and preservatives and other things that are not quote natural, and it also takes away the things that are beneficial about the apple, like the fiber and other things that make apples really, really healthy for you. So people conflate just because something is all I'm saying is just because something is all natural doesn't necessarily imply in any way that it's healthy
Mhm.
or good for the environment or wholesome or any other good adjective you can apply. It doesn't Natural does not mean that in the context of food marketing.
Yeah, and I think that the confusion around the word natural is very similar to the confusion around the word organic.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Um, I was in the grocery store and I heard this little boy ask his mom what why she got the organic chicken.
Right.
And she said, "Oh, organic means that the chicken lived a really happy life and was never
Mm-hmm.
in a cage and all of these other," like, she told a story about
Oh
this
yeah.
chicken,
Yeah.
and I was standing there like, "Oh, none of that is true."
It's
Like,
absolutely, yeah, and I think my theory anyway is that because like the word natural, the word organic seems healthy. It seems good. It seems better
natural?
than inorganic. And
Yeah,
so people can ascribe a lot of things to the organic label that are not actually true because they feel true. They feel like
mhm.
it feels like it should be true.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I
so people
remember
are able to do that. Yeah.
totally, I mean, for years, I thought that, organic was better for the planet.
I did too. Absolutely did too.
Yeah, I was all about it, and then I started taking more science classes, to be honest, and I was like, "Oh, is that how organic farms work?"
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that, about how organic and natural are maybe not always the best environmental choices. For example, you blew my mind with vanilla.
Yeah, so vanilla.
Vanilla has
Um
never been so exciting, you guys. It
it's
is in the
hey,
chocolate strawberry.
it is spicy. Move over,
Oh, yeah.
move over, chocolate. Vanilla's in town. Yeah. So yes, so essentially vanilla. So how do I begin? Vanilla. So everyone knows how ubiquitous vanilla is. It's everywhere. It's
Mhm.
in food, it's in candles, it's in room freshening sprays, it's in deodorant, it's in everything that you could possibly think of, including all sorts of food. So, one thing I do want to say is natural flavors are not inherently unsustainable to make. They're made in a different way than quote artificial flavors, even though they are fundamentally the same chemical. So like the primary chemical component of vanilla is called vanillin. And if you make that if you synthesize that chemical in a lab, that would be considered an artificial flavor. Whereas if you make that chemical by fermentation, that would be considered a natural flavor. Even though it's
Okay.
literally exactly the same thing.
Okay, I'm very confused. Are you not doing the fermentation in a lab? Like,
Well,
why?
so that's the thing. That's yes, yes. You and circle gets the square. You have hit the nail on the head there. It is extremely so. There is actually is an entire like cottage industry of these flavor houses that will ferment natural flavors. Because there's such a market for them. And again,
Well,
I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here, though that's not inherently unsustainable in and of itself. Fermentation is no worse for the environment than synthesizing it in a lab. But it just goes to show that people don't understand that there's no difference. And well, it's unsustainable in one way, in that fermentation can be, it's not always, but it can be more expensive.
mm,
So it's unsustainable economically. But in terms of environmental impacts, I would say they're about the same. Except,
okay.
yeah, they're probably about the same. I mean, minor differences, but yeah, they're probably about the same environmental impacts. But one way that a natural flavor, and specifically with vanilla, one way that a natural flavor is produced, and often is, if you're talking things like French vanilla ice cream or things like that, or even whole vanilla beans, is you have to harvest it directly, the vanilla bean directly from the vanilla orchid plant.
Hmm.
And vanilla orchids are very, very they're in danger. They're It's not a crop that has a very stable base. There's only two. I think there's only two varieties that are very closely related that are used for commercial vanilla production.
Mm.
And they're incredibly closely related. They don't like, so basically, if there's a disease or anything, that's it. It'll wipe out pretty much the entire crop of vanilla overnight.
Hmm.
Um, it's also that they rely on just, I think, one or two bee species to pollinate. They can't self-pollinate really by themselves, so they need bees, and those bees are also in danger. So because of climate change, because hello,
Right.
um, and then also the other biggest thing is vanilla is a tropical plant, so it grows on tropical islands, which, as we know, tend to get the brunt of climate fueled weather disasters and whatnot. So just all across the board, trying to harvest vanilla from the vanilla orchid is really, really harmful, and there's also a lot of like economic uh, harms that come, because it's really valuable, so people steal it a lot of times. So there's these crazy sort of black market of vanilla thieves all over in Madagascar and all of these countries where vanilla is a primary export, and a really big source of you know economic vitality in these countries is vanilla. And so it's, again, it would require a kind of a deft hand to move away from that, so that you don't like economically decimate these countries that are very reliant on vanilla. And I'm not trying to say like we just need to abolish all vanilla orchids. Like that's not what I'm saying at all. But I do think being more mindful about it, especially because we can get the exact same thing without all of the harms that this creates, and without risking wiping out an entire species of orchid just for human consumption.
Yeah, that's like it's so wild to imagine because it is so ubiquitous.
It
Like
is. It is.
I
And
have
I will
vanilla.
say too. Only I think only about 1%, if memory serves, of vanilla is made with fresh vanilla beans, with
Hmm.
vanilla beans that are harvested directly from the vanilla orchids. But vanilla is everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is, even 1% has a huge, huge, huge impact.
Well, and so we have wiped out species for human consumption, right? We did it with
Absolutely.
bananas.
Yeah, oh yeah, bananas. So bananas are interesting. So yeah, um, before about the 1950s, or a little earlier than that, 1930s maybe, bananas were not a thing that people had outside of the Caribbean because they weren't able to be transported across the ocean. So no one out, like we think of bananas now as just a common staple, but
Hmm.
you know, not that long ago, bananas had never been sold commercially just because they weren't capable of being transported. And that changed when they started uh, developing and growing a particular variety of banana called the Gros Michel banana, or Big Mike, as it was affectionately known. And Big Mike was fantastic. It like basically it had a lot of physical properties that made it so that it was able to withstand the journey from the Caribbean. Um, and it ended up they ended up becoming really really popular in the U.S. and commercially available, and everyone all of a sudden everyone was all about bananas. And
Did they
then
go
it was
bananas for
they
bananas?
went bananas. Oh, very good.
I'm
Point
sorry, I
point
love a bad pun.
point
Carry
for
on.
Tara. Point for Tara. There you go. Yes, I love it. But no, yeah. So basically because this one variety of banana was the only one that was feasible to be sold in the U.S., and because it became such an amazing success in the U.S., they grew the Gros Michel as a monoculture, which means that literally large swaths of land entirely planted with one crop,
Hmm.
and they're all genetically identical. So what
Mm.
happens with that, the danger of that is that if there's a disease, then because all of the plants are identical, there's nothing to stop the disease from just decimating the entire crop. And that's exactly what happened to the Gros Michel. It was hit very hard by a fungal disease, and then it was essentially left extinct after time. And in fact, so two fun facts about that. That first of all, it actually inspired the shortage of bananas was so immediate that it actually inspired a 1940s novelty song called "Yes, We Have No Bananas."
I've heard this song,
You
and I
have
never understood
it's
it
like a
until
it's
now.
so that's why the Gros Michel, you can blame monocultures for that one. And the other fun fact is that is why fake banana flavor doesn't taste like the bananas we have now.
You
They t-
stole my anecdote.
they taste. Oh, I'm so sorry. No,
No, it's totally
they
fine.
taste like the Gros Michel instead of the banana we
Yeah.
have now, which is called the Cavendish. And the Cavendish has so far has been immune to a lot of the issues that took down the Gros Michel. But that is most scientists say it's also grown, by the way, also grown as a monoculture, the Cavendish these days. So it's most scientists agree it's only a matter of time before the entire banana industry collapses again because the Cavendish will fall because it's there. We haven't learned that growing monocultures is not a good idea.
This is true. And that's part of why I'm having you on. But yeah, I that was one of the things that actually really got me more curious about like food marketing and PR was because in one of my back when I thought I was going to be a scientist,
Mm.
um, in one of my I mean it was like Chem 101, maybe Chem 102. Like it
Uh-huh.
was not a high level class.
Right.
And we were in lab and
And you made banana flavor?
our professor was like, "I have a surprise for you guys today. I'm not telling you the purpose of what we're doing. You have to guess." And we're all
Okay.
like, "Okay." And so we're in there and everyone's in their little groups at their bench and eventually we all kind of get to the same part of the experiment at the same time and the entire lab filled with banana smell.
What?
And it was actually quite nice. It wasn't
Was
like
it? Okay, good.
overwhelming,
Because no,
overripe banana. It
because the
was just
banana
like,
flavor is one of those that you need like 2 drops to fill like a swimming pool.
oh yeah, which is why it was easy for us to make the entire room smell like banana.
Sure.
Um, and it was so funny. It was like we all just kind of started looking at each other like, "Am I having a stroke? Are you having a stroke? What's going on?"
Do you smell
Like,
bananas?
"I
Yeah.
thought you smell lemons when you die. What's happening?" Um, and, like, I guess the entire class silently looked at the professor at the same time, and he was standing there smiling, and he goes, "Congratulations, you've all just made artificial banana flavor." And
I
then he
love it.
told us
Love it.
that the reason we don't recognize the taste is not because artificial flavors it's not because, like, there's something wrong with them
No, it's
chemically and
just
they're
based on
bad
an
for
old
you.
banana.
Yeah, it's just based on a banana that doesn't exist anymore. Um, and I just was, like, super fascinated by that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
So
so that got me really more interested into how we make food and what we consider artificial, because if I
right.
can make banana flavor, like,
Yeah,
it suddenly was not that scary anymore.
yeah,
Um
that I think is the thing that often gets lost. I think part of the reason people cling to things that seem natural is because we need to kind of demystify science and scientific process for people, because the unknown is scary. So if people don't know how science works, they're going to be scared of it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's we've seen that with just about anything in any field. Like,
I mean,
if you
yeah, most
and
recently,
it's
most splashily, vaccines.
yes.
I
And
mean,
it's basic human instinct, which I can understand because, back in our hunter-gatherer days when other stuff could eat us on a pretty regular basis, fear was a good thing to feel. It
yeah.
kept you alive.
No, that wasn't just irrational. That was horse sense, you know?
Yeah. And but so now, and I think especially as over time, we as human beings have been able to specialize our knowledge to such extreme levels that it is really hard for some people to communicate what they're doing, because communication is a skill by itself. And I
Agreed.
and I'm sorry, but scientists and certain companies, they just don't have a good PR team, but
I
organic
completely
does have a good
no.
PR team.
So that actually
It is big
dovetails.
organic, it's a billion-dollar industry,
Absolutely. And I do, I
and
want to put a pin in that thought that you just had, though, about science
go for it.
communication, and come back to that if
Mhm.
we are pivoting back to GMOs at a later time.
Oh, I was gonna go there now.
You want to go there now? Okay, perfect. Even
If you
you're
don't
one
mind.
no, you're
I
one
feel
step
like
ahead of me. You're one step
I
ahead
feel
of
like
me.
it's
That's
just
perfect.
naturally
Natural,
flowing
organically
toward
flowing. Yeah.
organically and naturally flowing
Yes.
towards
No,
this
that's
whole
perfect. That's exactly what I was going to say, because I
yeah.
genuinely believe that GMOs are one of the biggest failures of science communication
Mm,
ever
mhm.
in history. If not the biggest, one of the biggest.
I
And yeah, because people are scared of them. But the thing, first of all, just as a threshold issue for GMOs, to anyone who is scared of them, I want you to think about next time you go get broccoli or vegetables in the store, tell me that those crops have not been selectively bred. Tell me that those are exactly the crops. Like, I mean, actually, do yourself a favor. Look up a picture of what corn looked like before the advent of agriculture. And tell me the corn you see in the store is the same corn.
Yeah. I mean,
So selective
we
breeding has been around for centuries.
yeah, there
And
wouldn't
it's
be a
nothing, yeah,
billion people without it.
exactly. There's nothing scary about selective breeding. And I don't think people would think selective breeding is scary. And yet, when you add in the science aspect of it, even though it always was science, when you add in
Mhm.
a guy in a lab coat tinkering,
A
all of a
white guy
sudden,
in a lab
a
coat.
white guy in a lab coat, absolutely
Yeah.
right. Um, then all of a sudden it becomes very scary, even though all that's happened, really. It's still selective breeding, it's just more targeted.
Which often gives us better results,
Absolutely. Like, I think that's
right?
the thing that people are very quick to dismiss GMOs because
Mhm.
all they see are these sort of people frankenfoods, they used to be called, or they still
Yeah.
are, I think. Sometimes people call them that. And I remember once upon a time there was these something made the rounds when the internet was still very much the internet as we know it anyway was still very much in its infancy, and someone posted or put a story online that went fairly viral about a GMO strawberry. Do you remember this? A GMO strawberry that they were splicing with like some like shark DNA or something like some
I don't
like an art like some fish that lived in very cold oceans.
I thought it was a
And
tomato in a fish.
oh, maybe it was I thought it was a strawberry.
I have a very solid image of a tomato with a syringe and like fish in the syringe
Oh,
in my
maybe.
like instilled in my brain.
Yeah, so
But
it was
anyway, that's not
yeah, but it was
yeah.
very it was so like people were terrified of that because they were like,
Mhm.
"Ew, fish in my fruit." When first of all, no one was actually doing that. Like, I mean, there was no evidence that anyone was actually trying. But basically, the article stated that the reason people were trying to do that is to make the fruit, whatever it was, whether it was a strawberry or a tomato, more resistant to cold temperatures. So that was the whole premise of this thing. But first of all, like I said, no one was actually doing that.
Right.
And B, like, even if they were, like, it wouldn't be nearly as gross as you think it would. Like, there wouldn't actually be a fish in your tomato. Like, the fact that it just it genuinely confounds me that that's what people think. You
I mean,
know?
I feel like there's a lot of confirmation bias because if you have
Mm-hmm.
the naturalistic fallacy, you're like, oh, of course, we shouldn't be doing that.
Yes.
You know, we're playing God, we're doing this, we're doing that. And I'm like, one thing I struggle with is that it emphasizes this concept that humans and nature are separate when in
Mm-hmm.
fact we are not.
Agreed.
Right? And everything we do and everything we have comes from this planet.
Right.
Where else would it come from?
I'm saying.
Um, and so, like, if we're going to be breeding crops and livestock
Yeah.
to get certain traits, right? We want a better nutritional value. We want a
Right.
better flavor. Nothing is wrong with that, and we've been doing it since Gregor Mendel has been playing with peas, since before then.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
And
I was thinking too, like, even I think I would imagine selective breeding of dogs must go back further than that, even.
oh yeah, I mean, everyone, your pets are GMOs.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Hell yeah.
they're
Hell
and
yeah.
and
They are.
honestly, some of them are mistakes, okay? Some of those animals are living really uncomfortable lives because you think a squished nose is cute and,
Yeah.
you don't
Agreed.
care that your German Shepherd has arthritis in their
Yeah.
hips because all
Right.
that is inbreeding.
Right.
Whereas when you're working with genetics, a lot of the times, and the only reason I know this is because my husband works with genetics. A lot of the time, what you're doing is you're looking at an organism, right? Whether it's a broccoli or a fungus, and
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, oh, these are the genes that it has. But
Mm-hmm.
just like us, not all of our genes are expressed,
Right.
right? So you sometimes you're just turning on a gene that's already there,
Yeah.
which seems pretty close to natural. That's not even
That
like
could happen because of a mutation. That could just occur.
yeah. And also I know people get a little squeamish around the word mutation, but genetic mutations happen all the time. It's
Yeah,
how you get
naturally. They
naturally.
happen. They
Genetic mutations are
happen.
natural. Yeah,
Yeah.
and my favorite fun fact about mutations is blue eyes. Every single person on the planet who has blue eyes is a descendant of one woman who had the first genetic mutation that turned her eyes blue from brown in Central Europe about 6 to 10,000 years ago.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
That is
Um,
incredible.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a blue-eyed person and I read that
Same.
once and so it
Yeah.
stuck with me.
Yeah.
Um, but that's, mutation really just means change in
Right.
this sense.
Yeah.
Um, so in a way, we're all GMOs because when
Mhm.
two adults make a baby, you're changing up the DNA and little mutations are happening, and voila, you made your own bundle of GMO.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. I mean, I do think I've heard too. I'm not as familiar with this, but I've heard in general that in Europe and the UK specifically that GMOs are incredibly, incredibly unpopular, more so than they are in the US. And I mean, I think it's it's hard to for me to comprehend that, only because, like, as you and I have discussed, like, there's really nothing scary about it, um
Except for it being unknown.
except for it
Because
being unknown. But we can fix that with consumer education, you know,
which is what we're
especially.
trying to do right
Exactly,
now.
exactly. So I do think people have this very visceral reaction to
Mhm,
GMOs, and
totally.
I think part of that, I don't there must have been people actively against it, because otherwise people would have just not even known. I actually don't know how that movement started, that anti-GMO movement really started,
I
but
wanna guess that it was, marketing and money
well, I
because
mean, yeah, probably.
I'm just
That's I
yeah,
mean, when in doubt, it probably is.
yeah, when in doubt, follow the money.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
like, organic I forget how many billions of dollars a year is going on in the organic industry, but
Mhm.
it's huge.
It's huge. Yeah.
Um, but it has customer trust,
Yeah.
and that's really the difference because you think you know what it is.
Yeah.
And let's talk
And
about that for a second. We think we know what organic means.
oh, we do
We
not.
think we know what natural means.
Yeah.
Like the mom I talked about in the grocery store before,
Yeah.
she thought organic meant
Free range.
absolutely
Yeah.
no, yeah, the organic chicken. She thought
Yeah.
it meant absolutely no pesticides,
Yeah.
insecticides, herbicides. She thought it meant zero chemical input whatsoever. And you can all go on the USDA website right now and see the list of all the organic
Pesticides,
inputs.
herbicides, insecticides,
Yeah,
fungicides, everything.
it's
And
it's a
again,
pretty long list.
yeah, and
It's rude.
as we discussed earlier, the line between what's natural and what's synthetic is often very blurry. So you
Yeah.
can, like, so for example, I mean, I actually don't know if this is the case for things like pesticides, but I can't imagine it would be any different, that you can make more or less the same pesticide in a natural way or in a synthetic way.
I
And
mean,
that is that so the fact that so I want to just say right up front, organic does not ban pesticides.
mhm,
You're allowed to use most, with a couple of important exceptions, you're allowed to use most natural pesticides, not synthetic pesticides. So
right.
again, that is a really important distinction there, that it's not pesticide free. It just means you're
Mhm.
allowed to use only natural pesticides.
And
And
a
there have
lot
been
of people
studies
are
there have
gonna
been
think
studies that show that synthetic pesticides actually are, because science is cool and does good things. Synthetic pesticides are more effective. They're safer. They, like, so there's no, I mean, I'm not saying across the board. I'm saying that there are synthetic pesticides that are safer than the natural alternatives that are out there.
yeah, and the thing about them being more effective, this is one of the reasons that, I'm having you on this ocean-based show, and we have
I
not
know we
actually talked
barely
about the
scratched the
ocean
surface
at all
about
yet.
that. I know.
But this is why. So people are gonna think, "Oh, a natural pesticide or herbicide or fungicide or insecticide or whatever,
Whatever.
that's gonna be okay. That's not gonna hurt the environment." Um, Bad news.
Wrong. Absolutely
It
false.
absolutely will because you're altering. the nutrient level in the ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So farm runoff, right? They put the input on the farm, it rains, they irrigate, however the water gets there, it runs off to the rivers go to the ocean.
Right.
And so when you have excess nutrients, it doesn't matter if they're natural or organic, they are
Mm-hmm.
still excess nutrients.
Yeah.
And so they're going to feed algae,
Mm-hmm.
and then the algae population is going to explode. And you're like, oh, but it's algae, it's natural. Well, okay, that size of an algae population is not natural, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote, right? We artificially gave it excess nutrients. And now the algae is using all of the air in the water. And that creates a dead zone because the other life that lives in the water can't breathe, and it suffocates and it dies. And that's how you get the dead zone at the bottom of the Mississippi, where the Mississippi goes into the Delta and into the Gulf of Mexico. And I was there once in Louisiana, walking along a beach on a very sticky, balmy day. And all of a sudden, all of these fish washed up dead on the beach. That's part of a dead zone. And so buying organic is
Doesn't
not
stop that.
actually helping the ocean.
No.
And it depends, I mean, I know it's hard to like figure out which crop and this and that and like which pesticide, blah, blah. You can't know, unfortunately.
No. Well, yeah, I would
but
say
like,
too. Like, yeah, there's no. I would say I don't know specifically about oceans and ocean health, but I wouldn't think an organic produce would be better, or I don't think it would be better or worse. I think it would be about the same in terms of ag runoff into the ocean.
well, and that's an interesting thing that I did look into a little bit, because you mentioned that the organic inputs are often less effective.
They
Um,
are, yeah. So you do
and they're
so
often,
yes, you do have to use more pesticides usually because they're less effective.
and more is the
And
problem.
what? Yeah, so
More
more
is the
is
problem,
more.
because then you get
So
more
oh
runoff
right, yeah, that
from
makes
the
sense.
organic
Sorry,
farm than from the
then I'm
conventional
no, you're
farm.
right. You're right. That's
And you're
true.
just like,
But
shit.
also too, don't forget, as we were discussing, like GMO crops can have a lot of benefits, and they can be bred to be resistant to pests and diseases, which would eliminate the need for a lot of pesticides. But organic farms can't use GMO crops. So on two fronts, they do have a higher rate of pesticide use.
Yeah.
But I don't. What I was saying, I don't think the organic pesticides themselves are necessarily better or worse than synthetic ones. I think if runoff is runoff, there's probably more from organic farms, but the pesticides are probably about on an equal footing.
Sure.
So
But yeah, so for those of you concerned about farm runoff,
yeah, organic is not the way to go.
no. Um, and yeah, I mean that that is the tie-in here for our ocean story. But I did feel like this is really critical, because everything we're talking about for the food labeling, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
organic or natural or what, this all translates to seafood labeling, whether it's,
Yes,
is it wild
absolutely.
caught, is it farmed, even what species of fish it is. When you're in the supermarket, it is often labeled incorrectly, so you don't
Mm-hmm.
even know if you're buying the sustainable fish, right? That the
Absolutely.
Monterey Bay Aquarium says this one's okay.
No, absolutely. I remember reading like a hilarious article. I think it was in the New York Times, going back many years, about this particular issue, about how seafood is just so often mislabeled, that people don't know. Even if you're buying tilapia, like, you're not
Yeah,
guaranteed that it's tilapia. It could
could be
easily be
something else.
something else. And
Yep.
yeah, it's amazing to me. And I get it. Listen, consumers, food, we have to make food buying decisions so much and in such
Hmm.
volume. We just don't have time to fact check everything. And I get that. Like, I'm not trying,
Yeah.
like, it's not like buying a new mattress or a new car that you do once every 10 years or whatever. You don't have to, you have time to research those kind of products. Food, you don't have time.
No, you need
No.
to eat now. You're
Yeah.
hangry.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. Exactly.
Your kid is screaming, "Put something in its mouth." Like,
Yes, exactly.
you know,
Exactly. So no,
for real though,
I'm not,
and
I don't begrudge consumers for not
no.
being more aware or making more informed buying choices, because we don't have time, and companies purposefully kind of hide the ball because it's easier for them to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And
So,
this is the point of your paper too. Um, this is why we need a sustainable food label
yes.
and across the board because, you know, I want to talk about what a sustainable food label would mean for our agricultural practices,
Hmm.
um, and also from an environmental justice standpoint,
Hmm.
because you mentioned in your paper about golden rice, how it
Yeah,
is a genetically modified rice
it is.
that literally saves the lives of children,
Yeah.
right? Um, and there's also the other issue of the fact that, as you mentioned before, things like bananas and a lot of crops that come from these tropical regions, um, they're being hit the hardest by climate change. And
Absolutely.
so if Americans and Europeans are going to exercise their privilege of choosing what food they do and do not want to eat, if you're telling Africans, I don't want your GMO food, and they're like, well, this is all I can grow because of climate change,
Yeah.
because I need this crop to be drought resistant.
Yeah.
Like there's a serious disconnect
Absolutely.
um, happening.
Yeah.
Now,
And
obviously, your
mhm,
paper is just about food labeling in the United States, so we don't need to
yes.
go totally balls to the wall on it. But we all get the idea. Like, we do put labels on imported foods as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely.
So you have the
Um,
floor.
wow. Well, there was a lot in that question. Where would you like me
I
to
know, I'm
start?
sorry.
No, it's fine. Do you
Let me
want me
just put the
to?
whole world on your plate and please
That's
unpack it for us.
okay.
Thank you.
So do you want me to? Should I discuss some golden rice in a little more detail, or is that something you feel
Oh,
like your
yes.
listeners are
Yes, let's
aware of?
clarify what the hell I
Okay.
was
So
talking
yes. So
about so that you
yes.
can answer my question in a meaningful
So
way.
yes. So golden rice. It was, again, I mean, going back to the sort of abject failure of GMOs as an exercise in science communication. Not the abject failure. Like, that would be a perfect place to cut. By the way, just given the
Yeah.
abject failure of GMOs and podcasts.
And podcast.
No, the abject failure of GMOs as a science communication experiment, because it's truly where it failed.
Mhm.
Golden rice. So essentially, um, you know, Doctors Without Borders and a lot of other agencies were finding that in developing countries, children had really severe vitamin A deficiencies, which was causing a lot of them to lose their sight, and also their lives if the deficiency was bad enough. So scientists developed a strain of rice that had was essentially enriched with vitamin A. It was a GMO. I feel like it's important to state, but it was a GMO, and the reason it's called golden rice is because literally the extra vitamin A gave it a really distinctive golden hue. So it's called golden rice, and they started saying, okay, hey, we've developed this rice that can be, rice is a staple in these countries. It can be easily distributed. It's not perishable. It can just be added to children's diets. And there's no all they did was add vitamin A. I mean, I'm making the scientific process sound a lot simpler than it actually is. It took years and years and years to develop this strain of rice, but that's the only change they made, was adding vitamin A. Everything about the rice is exactly the same. It's rice. So you can do everything you would do with normal rice, you can do with golden rice. So they were finding that they were offering golden rice to these developing countries, and they were getting refused. They were saying, no, we're not going to bring in golden rice because it's a GMO and we don't think it's safe. And it's also been met because it was so because it was genetically modified. And because there was such a backlash to GMOs at the time, a lot of countries and enacted essentially legislation that banned GMOs, as by the way, organic does. So the U.S. does not exactly have clean hands here.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. also has that kind of legislation, although it is voluntary. It's not a mandate. Where in other countries, GMOs have just been met with incredibly burdensome regulations, and it's so this golden rice has never really been able to be used on a wide scale, and it's had really untold impacts on developing countries because these children, there's vitamin A deficiencies still exist. They're not that
Mm-hmm.
that we had to fix and we didn't use it. So it's very sad to me, and that's the thing that stopped that destroyed lives by taking even if all that happened is someone lost their vision. That's an incredibly hard disability to have, and at worst they lose their lives. I mean, and we don't want to fix that problem because we're scared of scientists like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very distressing to me that's the reality that we live in.
Ironically, and this is where my very dark humor comes out, uh, they're dying natural deaths,
Yeah, absolutely, it's true. I mean,
right?
that's
Because
so we
we
can't
shouldn't feed
afford.
them
No,
a
you're
GMO.
absolutely true. It's absolutely true. I mean,
And
it's very sad that is the case, but it's true. Like, people would
yeah,
rather die on that hill of
literally dying.
we can't
Yeah.
have GMOs in our food supply than
Yeah.
literally save lives. Like,
And the lives, and let's
the
emphasize
lives
just for
of
a second,
children under
the lives of
5.
children under
Yes.
5, like
Yeah,
toddlers.
toddlers, literal children.
Yeah,
And
and I yeah,
so
it's pretty.
it's pretty absurd that is what, because truthfully, like, people agree that the fact that it was GMO is what
Mhm.
stopped golden rice from actually being used on a global scale.
Yeah, I feel like golden rice is like the poster child
It
of
is absolutely.
the failure of science communication.
Hmm.
Um,
And just how
and
far people are willing to go to avoid GMOs.
they're willing to let children die.
Yeah.
Like, it's really mind blowing, and I think that it makes me wonder what exactly they think is gonna happen if they eat
Well, I
GMO.
mean, that's the thing that I don't understand is, like, there are literal children dying. Like, what else have you got to lose? You know?
Right.
Like,
Like,
what is the worst outcome that you're so afraid of?
yeah,
The
what is
worst
worse
outcome is
than death?
already, yeah, the worst outcome is already happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that
On that,
happy note,
yes, on that upbeat
let's
note, yeah.
let's transition real quick. So when I imagine, and you can get into the legalities of it a bit more, but when I imagine a sustainability label,
Mhm.
um, we're going beyond organic,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Um,
I also do want to
I
emphasize, by the way, that people really do think that organic means better for the environment.
oh
Like, that's
yeah,
a
yeah,
really
and
common misconception, and I want to clarify that right up front. Like, and believe me when I say I get pushback on that. Like, whenever I
oh
say that to people, people are like, no, organic is definitely better for the environment. I'm like, I literally wrote a 30-page paper on that topic. I can guarantee you it is not.
yeah, and that's honestly,
Like,
I fear talking about this with
me
people.
too. Me too.
Um, like it's because
It's
it is something that impacts us every day, multiple times a day, especially
terrible.
when we have like we eat multiple times a day. We have to go to the grocery store, and it is extremely personal. And it
Absolutely.
is, it's also, for those, it's what you feed your family.
Yes.
And, it, I read, I looked for it because I wanted to share it in the show notes and I could not find it because I
What's
read it
that?
years ago. But there was an article written about this new term called self-righteous eaters.
Yeah.
And it was people who they don't just get extreme in like their personal choice of diet, whether it's like I'm 100% organic all the time or I'm a vegan or
Right.
something else. Um, but they make a point of like actively trying to shame other people and guilt other people for not
Mm-hmm.
making their choice.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that generally in the US, there's also been very much of a call out culture, like, "You're not doing enough, you're not doing
Yeah.
this right, you're not doing that
Agreed.
right," like, "Look at you," not versus a call in culture of like, "Hey, by the way, what you said could be considered racist. Here's
Yeah.
why."
Yeah.
And like give people a chance to learn something,
Right. Absolutely.
right? And so when it comes to food, it is like this spicy hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
But I forget where I was going with that. Well, but yeah, like you say organic's not better for the environment, and people freak out
People flip out.
because they're trying so hard to do
Yeah.
what's right for the environment and to do what's right for their family, and then you find out that you've been bamboozled.
And so I want to,
And
for anyone who might be feeling that way, I want to be very clear. Food companies have entire teams devoted only to making you buy their product and feel good about buying it. If you were
Mhm.
bamboozled by that team, that's
Of
understandable.
of professionals?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and who have nothing better to do, whose life work it is
Mhm.
to get you to buy their product. That is
Yeah,
no, there's no shame in being bamboozled by that. It's designed to bamboozle you.
totally. And
So
this
it's,
this is why I care so much about policy, is to
yes,
prevent the marketing bamboozling,
yeah,
which is so fun to say,
yes.
bamboozle.
Bamboozle,
Um,
is bamboozlery a word? It should be if it's not.
I think it is. Um,
It should be. It
but
is. I
it should
decree.
be.
I decree it's a word now.
Thank you. It's
Yeah,
official.
yes.
Um, but so for me, to avoid the bamboozling, when
Yes.
I think of a sustainable label,
Yes.
it makes me think that the food, whether it is grown on land or at sea,
Hmm.
what it means to me is that that food is not, at minimum, not harming the environment,
Hmm.
not harming our ability to feed the next generation,
Right.
and at best, environmentally beneficial.
Absolutely.
And I am a total nerd about restorative farming on land and sea. And so
Right.
that is what I envision. And it's also quite equitable because, who farms matters.
Hmm.
And you can create more jobs, you can grow more food from a
Yeah.
smaller amount of land, which means
Right.
we could also rewild a lot of current farmland.
Absolutely.
Um, so that's my fantasy. You
Hmm.
can tell me how it works legally.
So, I completely share that fantasy. I do think one thing I do feel like sometimes does get somewhat lost in that conversation is people assume, and there's a kernel of truth to it, but it's not the entire truth. People assume that smaller local farm is always the answer when you're dealing with the, you know, what if it's something that you want. And I'm not saying that that's not a very good option. It is, absolutely. If you're looking for a sustainable option, getting food that was produced close by to you in a sustainable way is one of the best options we have right now. But that scale in itself is not sustainable. Just if all farms were like that, it would not be sustainable. Just because we would need, there's too many people. The supply chains are too robust. They exist for a reason, and scaling up in terms of in other ways, not in ways but scaling up sustainably, scaling up in things like, I think one piece of technology that I'm really excited about that I wrote about in the paper is cultured meats.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I think that's super exciting, and that's a way that we can eliminate not only the land use that's devoted to cattle, but also all of the environmental impacts, all the methane and whatever else cattle does for the environment. Not to mention, just ethically speaking, it's better to not kill animals for food. I mean, let's be honest. We're all, I mean, even people who are dyed-in-the-wool carnivores. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So even people who are really, really like I eat meat and I'm proud of it, must feel a little bit like ethically weird about eating animals. It's a little strange. So
Yeah, I mean, I see how some people are like, well, it's the circle of life. Like, you're not going to tell the lion that it can't eat the
well, okay,
gazelle.
next time you want to go hunt down a cow with a spear, I'm all for that.
Oh,
Go
yeah.
for it.
With a
But
spear. Jesus.
I mean,
That sounds so violent.
if that's what you want, great. Then you have my blessing. But anything else, if you buy meat in the grocery store,
Yeah.
like you're not hunting anymore.
No, 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 no.
That's full on gathering at that point.
That's
Like,
full on.
like,
Well, and so like to go back to cultured meats.
yeah, sorry.
I also love the idea of cultured meats. You know, and for scaling, one of the things that actually does have me really excited about regenerative farms and polyculture farming, where you're growing more than one crop in
Yes.
the same
And
area,
that, yeah,
is that
obviously.
it regenerates the soil, it's a
Yes.
carbon sink, blah, blah, blah. But also, depending on how you do it, it can be scaled massively. Like the giant Aztec empire,
Yes.
they were doing agroforestry. You couldn't tell where their farm began and the jungle forest ended. Like everything there, they were cultivating. It was
Yeah.
either food or medicine, and it was an empire.
Yeah.
And there's all of these traditional ecological knowledge
Sure.
of how we can live in harmony with the environment.
Yes.
And like, I'm all for using all the tools.
Agreed. Absolutely 100%. And it's funny, this is something, I don't know. It just occurred to me too, like as you're describing the way that the Aztecs planted, like it occurs to me that the way we farm a lot of time is very much in opposition to what nature wants. And
It's so
but
like
at the same
the
time, like
opposite.
people are not enraged about the unnaturalness of that. Why not?
Yeah, I mean,
Why are GMOs so much worse than tearing down forests to plant corn?
I know, right? Like one of my absolute favorite people on this planet is Bren Smith.
Oh yes.
I quote him a lot. But I was reading his book about eating like a fish, and like
Yeah.
basically we have to ask ourselves, how does the ecosystem want to support us?
Yes,
And
exactly.
nature, shall we call her Mother Nature,
Mother
she
Nature.
abhors a monoculture.
Yes.
Like that is so unnatural, and that is why it's so hard.
Yeah. And yet there hasn't been the widespread outrage about it
Mhm.
as compared to
Yeah.
something like GMOs. And even to a certain extent, cultured meats is still a new technology, but it's had some people who have thought, ew, it's off-putting. I don't want to eat that. It sounds gross. Whereas it's not. Like it's just fully not gross. It's really
Yeah.
cool, as a matter of fact. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know why there hasn't been the the why people haven't really grasped on to things like monocultures in the same way that they have with GMOs. And I think part of it is that it's there's a there's a disgust element, I think, that comes from tinkering. Whereas
I
a
could see that.
monoculture is like it's certainly not natural, but it's not
Yeah.
disgusting in the same way. You know, I mean, I'm not saying GMOs are disgusting, but some people do feel that way. Some people feel that
Yeah, of
they're
course.
very off-putting.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, with the monocultures, I mean, there is, I think, a bit of a movement around soy because it is so environmentally
Oh, it's
detrimental. Growing
horrible.
soy is just a
Oh,
disaster.
it's
And
horrible.
listeners, I know you can't see us, but the reaction on Jillian's face when I said soy, I mean, her hands flew up in the air, her eyes got as big as saucers. Like, I'm gonna include a link in the show
Sorry, no,
notes
I
about
have no.
soy
Please don't.
because we could
I have
probably
no poker face. I'm sorry.
no, it's great, it's great, I love it.
Oh, it's
But
awful.
yeah,
No,
like,
soy is
not to go
terrible. Soy is terrible.
it's such a water hog, we are destroying the environment so that we can grow soy. I'm sorry, vegans. Listen,
You know what?
you're not helping.
You are not helping. Like
You're not
that's the
helping.
thing. Like, I mean, people often do think like, oh, a vegan diet must be like the best thing for the environment. And like, yeah, cutting down on meat consumption is absolutely a good environmental choice. But adding
Mhm.
soy is not the answer.
No.
Like,
Yeah, well,
if your primary
and
concern is environmentalism,
right.
soy is not a good thing to have.
No. And it goes back again to, you know, if you want to eat in an environmentally friendly way, you need to ask yourself, or we need to. I mean, I'm sorry, we're in a system that we didn't create, but we got to fix it, right? We need to ask ourselves, what does the ecosystem want us to grow?
Sure.
You know, and there not all soil is created equal.
Right.
So there are people who live in places where they cannot grow crops, but they can graze cattle,
Yes.
right? Like, so you have to work with the environment in which you live in
Mm-hmm.
order for both of you to flourish. If you're like,
Absolutely.
oh, well, I don't want to kill animals, so I'm going to have a bunch of soy everywhere because I need this protein, and then you destroy this whole habitat, and now the animals can't live there anyway.
Yeah.
Like, there's, you know, reevaluating our role as a species in an ecosystem
Yeah.
is what needs to happen. And I can
Absolutely.
understand how people are like, oh, well, if I make this black and white choice, I'm doing the right thing, because then you don't have to think about it anymore.
Exactly. And as I said earlier, like people don't have time to make that many decisions about food. They want something
Yes.
they want to have their rules and they want to stick to those rules. And
Yeah,
that's fair. But I do think
it is.
it needs a more nuanced approach. If you're truly looking for a sustainable diet, it is more nuanced than, oh, I'm just gonna be vegan. Or I'm gonna only I don't know what else would I don't even know what else would be considered like a I mean I guess there's like the locavore.
Oh yeah, that's really hard. Like, you
That's
need
so
time.
hard. That's so
You need
hard.
so much time to try
Yeah.
to, like, yeah, someone wrote a book, like, for a year she only ate food that was, like, grown and raised within 100 miles of her.
It's so
It was
difficult.
an epic journey.
Yeah. And
So, like,
that's
yeah, and
time most people just don't have.
no, totally. And the other thing too is, like, there are certain things you can eat that's super beneficial to the planet. Like, at some point,
Seaweed.
someone's gonna talk to me on this podcast about being a nerd about restorative ocean
Yes.
farming. Like, bivalves, mussels,
Yes.
scallops, oysters, clams, yummy. Yes, they're animals, but if we cultivate them, so many benefits to the entire ecosystem. And I'm just going to leave it at that
No.
for now.
Please. Please.
No. I could rant for hours,
No,
and
and I mean,
we're running
also
short on
we
time
okay,
now.
we can't also discuss that without discussing something like seaweed and kelp.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean,
Okay, fine.
just
Okay, fine.
just because like we were talking about soy and how terrible it is, seaweed could probably, I mean, it could replace soy, and it actually does, it benefits the environment.
Shh, shh,
What?
don't tell the soy lobbyists.
Although I do think, again, I think the biggest, probably one of the bigger issues with that, again, comes down to marketing. Because
Oh yeah.
because people have accepted, okay, like a soy milk latte or whatever. I'm not sure people are going to readily accept a seaweed milk latte. I have to be honest.
Well, okay, but here's proof. Marketing can totally turn that shit around.
Okay.
Pardon my French.
It's fine.
So we have had in the 90s, and I am old enough to remember this.
As am
In
I.
the 90s, McDonald's promoted their
I've
lean
heard of this.
burger.
I've heard of
It was a
this.
kelp burger.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there was still meat in it, but like a large portion of it was kelp, and like some basketball team was like all about it,
Yeah.
and it was a thing. And again, I think it just is going to boil down to education, because kelp is already in a lot of our products, like toothpaste and ice cream and
Mm-hmm.
beauty products. And it's a culinary staple
Yeah.
in a lot of other countries, and it can be super tasty. And I'm not just talking about your wakame salad and your sushi. Like,
No.
there's so many things you can do with it. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And it is like the most, probably that I can think of, the most sustainable thing you can eat, because it's a huge carbon sink.
Yes.
It grows like 2 feet a day. Cultivating seaweed, even if you're not doing polyculture
Yeah.
and you have other bivalves in there, um, it creates habitat
Yeah.
for fish. They're like herring, for example, they lay their eggs
Oh.
on kelp fronds, and other juvenile fish live in kelp forests until they get big and go out to sea. So you're benefiting the ecosystem and fishers, because
Mm-hmm.
some of these juvenile fish have commercial value, right? And so it's like, oh my god, oh my god,
Yeah. No, I actually
we're
heard,
gonna have,
no, one
yeah.
small thing. I don't remember who it was. It was I think it was someone from the UN or something like that. I heard a quote of someone who said seaweed is the greatest weapon that we have to fight global hunger.
Oh, absolutely,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
huge.
I don't remember who that was either, but it really is. And the accessibility as
Yeah.
well for creating a seaweed farm and for making it equal access to employment
Mm-hmm.
is amazing, because it does not take a lot of equipment.
Except, of
It
course,
really does.
because you go USA, it's a lot of times it's really hard to start kelp farms in the US because it's regulated like hell. It's so inconsistent.
Well, but that's the thing. It's almost, in some cases, it's like it doesn't exist, so it's not regulated, so they don't
Yeah.
even have a permitting process in some
Right.
places. Okay,
We need to,
we're getting
we
way
need
too
to,
much
we're
into
getting
this.
sidelined
Yeah, yeah.
here.
I just published a paper on this shit,
Yes, you
so
did.
we're gonna move on, because that's a different episode.
That is a different episode.
Um,
Yes, indeed.
but basically, the point of you and I discussing the naturalistic fallacy and your paper called The Natural Disaster is that organic labeling is useless. It does not help the ocean.
Yes. Okay. Although I
And
will, just one tiny caveat there. Yes, you're absolutely right. It does not help the ocean. It doesn't do what people think it does. But
right.
because people have so glommed on to the organic label and have ascribed a lot of words to it that are not there, there are producers that get themselves certified as organic and also behave in sustainable ways. So there are producers
Yeah.
who have the organic seal, who are very sustainable. But all I'm saying is the organic labeling system does not require that. And more
Yeah.
often than not, when you buy organic in the store, that's coming from a large factory farm, and you can be damn well sure that they are not keeping an eye on their sustainability practices.
Yes.
So that's a little caveat there.
Yes.
So.
Which is the point as well, that the consumers can't know who is doing the organic that they wish they were buying and
Uh-huh.
who is not.
Yes.
Thus the need for
For a
a
separate
sustainable
label.
food label.
Yes. Getting us back to the actual thesis of my paper. Sorry. We should not be allowed to talk about food.
It's okay. This is the time and the place we're allowed to.
Okay. Seriously. And for anyone who's still listening, you guys deserve a chocolate bar. I very an eco-friendly chocolate bar for making it this far. I appreciate it.
I think we're interesting.
Well, we're interesting to us. I don't know if we're interesting to anyone else, but
Well, hopefully there's
a few.
some
Hopefully
food and
they're
policy nerds out there that are
all 7 of you. I appreciate it.
getting their entertainment dollars worth. This is free content, so
It is free. There we go. That's what. Yeah,
yeah.
that's it. You get what you pay for, people. Anyway, okay. So yes, the sustainability label that I recommended in my paper, it essentially would work in much the same way that the organic label does, because there's a lot of good stuff in how it works. I was sort of in my own mind, I was kind of calling it organic 2.0, like new and improved organic. That basically it would function much like the organic label, that it would be voluntary. So farmers are not required to get themselves certified under this program. And my reasoning for that was it was mostly because you don't want a system like this to become in itself economically unsustainable, especially for smaller producers. You don't want it to become to the point that it's putting people out of business because they don't have the funds to file the permit, even though they meet the requirements. You don't want them to be faced with these really burdensome regulations, even though they are made in a sustainable way. So it would function in that way. So all food would have the word sustainable on it if it meets that definition. The second thing it would do, which again organic did very successfully, you can't use the word organic on your label unless you meet the USDA standards for what organic means. So that means all of these companies that are saying we're sustainably produced, we're eco-friendly, we're this, we're that, you wouldn't be able to use those terms anymore unless you actually are certified by the USDA. And that would be huge. That's a huge marketing experience right there. Like, that's so big. Companies use that. They use those vague, the terms are called greenwashing. They sort of use these vague, eco-friendly sounding terms to entice consumers into thinking that the products are actually sustainable. So this sustainability labeling would stop a lot of that. I'm not saying all of it, but it would stop a good portion of it, because you wouldn't be able to use the word sustainable unless you met the USDA definition. And theoretically, my hope would be if this were to be implemented as the program grew, people would put as much faith in it as they currently do in the organic label, and it would actually mean what consumers think organic means, which is sustainable. And again, I don't want to say maybe people will do the same thing with the sustainability label that they've done with organic and paint with think it means something that it doesn't. But I think sustainability is environmental sustainability is a concrete enough concept that I think if the legislation is designed correctly, people wouldn't need to pile more into it than is already there. It would be fairly robust because it means what it means. It means, as you said so eloquently, that basically it's not harmful to the environment and doesn't stop us from being able to produce food for future generations. And bonus, if it also benefits the environment. So, and I think everyone can kind of agree that that's what sustainability means. I think. Whereas organic, I think the definition is a lot more fluid. And it always has been. It always has been. So
this is true. Oh, that's fine. I think that I'm quite certain that.
Sorry, you cut out there for a sec. What'd you say?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. Sorry.
Connectivity issue. I think that what I said probably mirrors the UN definition of
Absolutely,
sustainability.
yes.
And while not every country has adopted that definition, that's generally what the public thinks
Yeah,
of.
absolutely.
Um, and and there's precedent for that in law as well,
Hmm.
like, public trust doctrine. You can't, give away certain things to the detriment of the next generation.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, this is a really important topic that affects, the global ecosystem.
Hmm.
And I hope that one day soon we have a sustainability
I
label,
do too.
and that you are one of the people in the background helping to write it and word it
Well,
correctly.
thank you. Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah, for
will
those of
say,
you that are
that there's some movement, not in terms of the legislation specifically that I proposed, but more and more states are adopting what are called extended producer responsibility, EPR laws, which
mm,
basically they create actually they're essentially targeting greenwashing, and they create a private right of action against companies who are using these really vague terms unless they have some meat to back it up. So that's a
nice.
really promising sign. I love the direction that these EPR laws are going. I think it's really incredible, and it's really forcing companies to put their money where their mouth is. And if they're going to make green claims, they got to back it up.
That is fantastic.
So
And that leads in nicely to what I like to do at the end of each show is tell our listeners how they can be involved. So if you hear of these laws, what are they called again, Jillian?
extended producer responsibility laws.
Okay, if you hear of these laws happening in your jurisdiction, in your area,
Call your
support them.
support them. Call your congressman, and try to be, like I do genuinely think that, like, there's the private sector has a really important part to play in all of this, and if we as consumers can move the needle a little bit on that, I think that's a huge step forward.
Yeah, I mean, from reading your paper, I learned how much consumers move the needle on organic. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean
there's a lot.
that's one thing we didn't touch on, but like that was the Organic Food Production Act was enacted because consumers wanted it.
Yeah, and so if you want a sustainability label,
Ask for it.
ask for it. And, come election time, get on it. Be
Yeah.
like, "Hey, why should I support you?" Start a movement. Like, gather your people,
Yeah.
gather your neighborhood, rip up your lawn and grow some food, by the way. That would also be great.
Yeah, and
Um,
also
that's another
the other
episode.
way I think, just on a more general scale, the way people can get involved, even if advocacy is not necessarily their thing, just
Mhm.
the growing awareness, like as we were discussing earlier, the amount of pushback I get when I tell people that organic is not very sustainable is pretty astounding. So just keeping in mind that the marketing around organic is not what it claims, is not really, like, companies benefit from the confusion around organic, trust me. So
Mhm.
the more we can just kind of spread the word that this is not the system that we need right now
Mhm.
is the best thing, because the more that truly is how grassroots movements are formed. And nowadays we think of organic as like it's a staple, it's always been there, but it was only enacted in 1990. It's not like it's that old.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, we need that kind of awareness around sustainability in food.
Absolutely.
So
And there are, for your awareness pleasure, there are going to be links in the show notes to Jillian's paper if you didn't get enough, um, and as well as a
if you
link to the
thought this
USDA.
conversation was fun but not long enough, enjoy the paper.
Yeah, here's a 30-page paper. Also, one of my favorite things to do is mine the citations of well-researched papers so that I can further learn things. But yeah, so there's going to be a link to Jillian's paper, a link to the USDA, discussing allowed and prohibited substances so that we're not making it up, as well as an article that's a review of a screening event of the documentary Food Evolution,
Mm.
which covers a lot of the material we covered. The documentary is also great, and perhaps for some of your friends who don't want to listen to a really long podcast, a more fun way to learn about food. But anyway, it has been a pleasure having you on the podcast,
Thank
Jillian.
you so much for
I
having me. This was
appreciate
great.
you. Yeah, I appreciate you so much sharing your depth of knowledge and your research um, on something that really is a very personal issue, but also has a huge environmental impact
Yep.
on land and sea.